This is Judge Joe Brown, and we're listening to We All Be News. News-free Dixie for the 21st century.
In Ellen. This prophecy was fulfilled on the afternoon of May 1st, 1866. 4 Irish policemen confronted a crowd of several dozen black men who were drinking and carousing on a street in South Memphis, which was the section of the city where most of the black population was. These were former soldiers, Union soldiers, men of the 3rd Colored Heavy Artillery, who had been mustered out of service just the day before. They were still in uniform. They had been officially disarmed, but a few were armed with concealed pistols. The policemen demanded that this crowd disperse. Black men refused and began cursing and taunting the police. One of them yelled out, "Hurrah for Abe Lincoln," to which one of the policemen replied, "Your old friend Abe Lincoln is dead and damned." More angry words were exchanged and tempers flared on both sides. The policemen, seeing that they were getting nowhere and that they were heavily outnumbered, started retreating up the street. Black men started following, cursing, and even shoving. Then one black man pulled out a pistol, fired into the air with the intention of scaring the policemen and speeding them along in their retreat. A few others then did the same, firing into the air. The policemen, thinking they were being fired at, halted in their retreat, pulled out their own pistols, and returned fire, firing into the crowd of black men. Other black men then pulled out pistols and fired at the policemen. This fusillade went on for 20 seconds. The policemen then fled the scene, 2 of them wounded. The black men then dispersed, and the streets of South Memphis were quiet again, but not for long. Word of this shootout spread through the city with lightning speed. Rumors flew around that this was the beginning of a full-scale black uprising and that the blacks intended to murder the whole white population of the city. Many whites panicked. Mobs of white men armed with clubs and pistols formed up spontaneously downtown, marched to South Memphis, and began shooting and beating black people indiscriminately. The brutality of these attacks was almost beyond comprehension. Unarmed and unresisting black men, women, and children were set upon by the mob without warning, shot to death at point-blank range, or beaten savagely with clubs, and their bodies left lying in the street. It was, by any means, a massacre. This went on until nightfall, when the mobs finally withdrew. But the massacre did not end there. Over the next 36 hours, rumors of black uprising continued to circulate around the city, and white mobs returned repeatedly to South Memphis, shooting and beating black people on the streets and in their homes. Mobs appeared in other parts of the city, too. And they not only inflicted death and bodily injury, they also attacked property, setting fire to black homes and churches and schools. The rioters made clear their intention. As they went about their work, many were heard damning emancipation, damning the Yankees who aided and protected the former slaves, and declaring their intention to kill or burn out as many black people as they could and scare the rest out of the city, along with their Yankee friends. Working-class Irish immigrants, especially policemen, were the great majority of the rioters. The black people of Memphis were powerless to resist this onslaught. A few tried fighting back, but it was hopeless. The black soldiers, as I mentioned, were in no position to help, for they had been officially mustered out of service and disarmed just before the riot broke out. Not a single white person was killed by a black person during the riot, although a few were wounded. The rioting went on until the early morning hours of May 3rd. The final toll was this: approximately 4 dozen black men, women, and children murdered, more than 75 injured, several raped, more than 100 robbed. As for the property losses, every black church and school in the city was burned to the ground. That's 4 black churches, 12 black schools, and almost 100 black homes. It was and remains one of the bloodiest and most destructive riots in American history. Now, you may be wondering, why was it allowed to go on so long? Well, for one thing, the city authorities took no action to restore order. The mayor of the city was, in fact, drunk during the entire riot. But even if he had been sober, he couldn't have done anything to restore order because, of course, as I said, the police themselves were among the rioters. That left it up to the U.S. Army to quell the riot, but the Army's authorities were very slow to respond. The Army commandant in the city had 4 companies of light infantry at his disposal, but he kept making excuses for not deploying them until the rioting had reached such an intensity that he could no longer remain aloof. Quicker action on his part could have saved many lives and much property. He was never held to account for this dereliction of duty. Nor was any rioter ever punished, nor was any restitution ever made to any of the victims of the riot. The Memphis Massacre was not only a very dramatic episode in American history, it was also a very important episode, a significant episode. Accounts of it quickly spread throughout the nation by telegram. It was, in fact, the most sensational news event in America outside of Washington, D.C. since the surrender of the Confederate armies a year before. Newspapers from Maine to California printed accounts of the riot. Northern Republican papers blamed it on Andrew Johnson's lenient policy, which Professor O'Donovan has discussed. As one Northern Republican newspaper editorialist said, Andrew Johnson, quote, has given the rebels back their power to crush and destroy the poor black man. The Memphis Massacre also attracted the attention of Congress. 1 week after the riot, during a debate in the House of Representatives, Congressman Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania responded to calls by some of his colleagues to restore the South to the Union without further delay. Congressman Stevens responded to these words, and I quote, "Let not these friends of secession sing to me their siren song of peace and goodwill until they can stop my ears to the screams and groans of the dying victims at Memphis." In the weeks and months after that, the Memphis Massacre was much on the minds of Congressman Stevens and other movers and shakers in Washington. Congress created a special committee to go to Memphis, interview witnesses, and investigate the massacre and write a report. This report concluded that what had occurred in Memphis was, quote, a bloody massacre of black people by white people. It concluded further, quote, the riots and massacres of Memphis are only a specimen of what would take place throughout the entire South should the government fail to afford adequate military protection. The American public, too, shocked and sickened by the death toll and the destruction and the evidence of the mob's savagery. Many people, at least many people outside the South, came to the conclusion that Southern whites could not be trusted to deal fairly with the freed slaves. And they came to the conclusion that the rebel states, the seceded states, were not yet deserving of readmission to the Union. The Memphis Massacre thus became a rallying cry in the momentous battle over the nation's Reconstruction. Again, Professor O'Donovan has given you the background. A few weeks after the riot, Congress finalized its own plan to reconstruct the South and restore it to the Union. This plan was embodied in a constitutional amendment, the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was, politically speaking, in effect, Congress's, the Republican-dominated Congress's answer to Andrew Johnson's program, which the Republican majority had decided must be overturned. Each of its 4 major sections was a response to the great issues that had brought Congress and the President head-to-head in these months after the Civil War. The four main issues being how the seceded states were to be readmitted to the Union, how the former Confederates were to be treated, what the status of the former slaves was going to be, and who would have overall control of the Reconstruction process, that is, Congress or the President. The 14th Amendment was passed by Congress and submitted to the states in June of 1866, just a few weeks after the riot. However, the constitutional requirement that amendments be ratified by 3/4 of the states meant that at least some southern states would have to ratify the 14th Amendment in order for it to become law. So, Congress submits the amendment to the states. The northern and western states promptly ratify, most of them. What about the southern states, which are still under former Confederate control? How did they respond? They responded with a firm no. Egged on by Andrew Johnson, who publicly urged the southern states to reject the 14th Amendment. All of the former Confederate states, with one exception, that being Tennessee, rejected the 14th Amendment, refused to ratify it, which prevented its ratification for the time being. This was the final straw for congressional Republicans. They now decided that the South must be forced to accept the 14th Amendment. And to do that, congressional Republicans would have to completely take over Reconstruction. And they had the power to do it. In the congressional elections that fall of 1866, voters gave the Republicans a huge veto-proof majority in both houses of Congress. Over and over in those congressional election campaigns in that fall of 1866, over and over, the Memphis Massacre was invoked in order to turn voters against the Democrats who sided with Andrew Johnson and his policies. Fortified by this landslide, congressional Republicans passed in March 1867 the Reconstruction Act, by which they did away with Andrew Johnson's Reconstruction program and substituted their own. Here too, the memory of the Memphis Massacre loomed large. The preamble to this Reconstruction Act, the preamble justified the act in part by pointing out that as things now stood in the South, quote, there is no adequate protection for life or property, end quote. They clearly had the Memphis Massacre in mind. Under the terms of this Reconstruction Act, the southern state governments that had been set up under Andrew Johnson's plan and that were dominated by former Confederates were dissolved. And the 10 former Confederate states that refused to ratify the 14th Amendment were put under military rule. In other words, the South reverted to the status of occupied territory, militarily occupied territory. Army generals were appointed with orders to see to it that in these states, in each of these states, elections were held for delegates to a constitutional convention that would write a new state constitution, all 10 of these states. The act further stipulated that black men, along with most white men, would be allowed to vote in these elections for delegates. Furthermore, the act stipulated, more and more demanding, furthermore, the act stipulated, the new state constitutions that were written by these delegates must guarantee black men the right to vote. Furthermore, the act stipulated, they're not done yet, furthermore, the act stipulated, the new state government thus created had to ratify the 14th Amendment. Only then, only when all these conditions had been fulfilled, the act said, would the state be readmitted to the Union. That is, its senators and representatives would then be seated in Congress and its votes would be accounted in the Electoral College. So, one by one, the southern states were readmitted to the Union under the terms of the Reconstruction Act, and the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. That is the process by which the 14th Amendment came to be. and at every stage there loomed over it the specter of the Memphis Massacre. To paraphrase Congressman Stevens, the screams and groans of the dying victims at Memphis were heard for a long time. Thank you.